Hello, welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you've been here before. My name is Beth Ann. Today I wanted to talk about two historical fiction books that I read relatively recently. I wanted to talk about Margaret Penard's Orla Rafferty Seeks Her Fortune and Out Front the Following Sea by Leah Angstman. And I actually read this a little while ago now, but I haven't talked about it yet on my channel. And I thought it would be fun to pair both of these together because they're both historical fiction. They're from different eras and take place in different countries, but they were both much more suspenseful and dramatic than I typically find historical fiction. And I got a big kick out of it, and I enjoyed both of these books a lot. So I thought I would talk about them together. So first, I'm going to talk about Orla Rafferty Seeks Her Fortune by Margaret Penard. This is book one of a new series Margaret is working on called The Widening Gyre. And if I remember correctly, I think she's planning to have several books in this series. Each one will follow a young female heroine. And Margaret's books often focus on some forgotten storylines from history, and in particular focusing on situations of injustice and class injustice and kind of class issues and economic issues, which is really great. And Margaret Penard, I'm sure if you're on my channel, you've heard of her before, but she's on BookTube and AuthorTube, so I will, of course, link to her channel down below. Please go check it out. So Orla Rafferty Seeks Her Fortune takes place in 1833 in the United Kingdom, and we follow our young heroine, Orla Rafferty, who's she's approaching a middle age, but she's not quite there yet. I guess I can't remember if we're told her actual age, but I read her as being sort of in her maybe mid-late 30s, something like that. Her husband has recently died before the book opens, so she's widowed and she inherited a small income from him. So in this book, we see her coming to terms with her newly widowed life and her new independence, and really figuring out what she's going to do and what she's going to be involved in. But the main first step she has to do is she has to protect her independence. She has to protect the small income and inheritance that she has. And that's really the line that carries us through the book, because she is fairly early on in the book, as she's trying to kind of learn about her investment options and learn how to safeguard her small fortune. She is taken advantage of because she is a young woman, and at this time women were not particularly well educated in financial matters, and so she doesn't really know how to do any of it. So that sort of kicks off alarm bells, and she has to correct that. And she does, because she's a strong, independent heroine, and I love her. And so the rest of the book follows her attempts to, I shouldn't say attempts, her very successful work to educate herself about the financial state of the United Kingdom at that time, and take control of her own money and get it into the hands of people who will actually steward it for her in ways that she supports. And she gets involved in the social movements of the time. So we learn a little bit about anti-slavery movements in the United Kingdom and concerns about people distancing their investments from the mid-Atlantic slave trade. We hear a little bit about movements in banking, moving from being a rich man's game designed to protect only the assets of the rich, to thinking about ways that people in the working classes can band together to sort of put all of their small amounts of economic power into one basket to create a much more powerful situation for all of them as a whole. And Orla is playing a really strong role in that. Because she is sort of operating outside of the cultural bounds, the social bounds of her sex, she comes into situations of personal danger and censure against her actions that she handles really well, and gets really lucky. And so that introduces the drama that I mentioned earlier, where you're concerned for her safety throughout the whole book. And then there's also a little bit of family drama in here as well, because Orla is from an Irish family, an Irish Catholic family, and she had married a clergyman in the Anglican Church and converted to that. And so at the start of the book, she's actually not really in touch with her family and in particular with her father. And so there's also that lovely human story of seeing what she does with her new independence and sort of with this stronger voice that she's gaining to correct some of those issues in her life. So overall, I really enjoyed this book. I felt like I learned a lot about this period of history and had just a really compelling, lovely main character to follow through the trials and tribulations in this book. So definitely recommend this. This was a fantastic read. And then I also want to talk, as I mentioned, about Out Front the Following Sea by Leah Angstman. And this is a early America's novel set in the colonies in 1689 in New England. And we follow a young woman, another young woman who's out on her own, Ruth Miner. And I'm just going to read the back of the book and then I'll tell my thoughts. So Out Front the Following Sea is a historical epic of one woman's survival in a time when the wilderness is still wild, heresy is publicly punishable, and being independent is worse than scorned. It is a death sentence. At the onset of King William's War between French and English settlers in 1689 New England, Ruth Miner is accused of witchcraft for the murder of her parents and must flee the brutality of her town. She stows away on the ship of the only other person who knows her innocence, an audacious sailor, Owen, bound to her by years of attraction, friendship, and shared secrets. But when Owen's French ancestry finds him at odds with a violent English commander, the turmoil becomes life or death for the sailor, the headstrong Ruth, and the cast of Quakers, Pequot Indians, soldiers, highwaymen, and townsfolk dragged into the fray. Now Ruth must choose between sending Owen to the gallows or keeping her own neck from the noose. So get from the back of that. There's a whole ton of drama in this book, which I absolutely loved because I have, very much a history textbook view of what these historical periods were like. And, it's one thing to read about the Revolutionary War. But then, sorry, I know that's 100 years ahead of where this book actually is, but to read about those times in history in a history textbook, it's not as doesn't give that sort of blood and guts, like immediate sense of what it might have been like to live then. So of course this is a fictional story, but a lot of the events that happen in it are definitely plausible and within the range of what would have happened to a young woman trying to make it on her own in the colonies at that time. It would be a very precarious, very dangerous existence. And we see Ruth Miner making really tough decisions because as a woman alone at that time, she couldn't just do whatever she wanted. And that puts her in some really tough and really dangerous situations at different times through this book. So this book definitely kept me sort of on the edge of my seat because you really want to know what's going to happen to her next as she's struggling to survive. There is the love story that is alluded to between her and that's sort of alluded to on the back, but is very much at the forefront in the book. The will they, won't they of will she and Owen manage to find their way back to each other with her, sort of stuck on shore and trying to survive and him stuck out in the ships being a sailor. So lots of drama, rich with historical detail, so much historical detail. Mostly done very well, just woven into the setting of the story so that you could really kind of picture where the characters were and feel like you had the detail that you needed. There were a couple points where the historical detail went just a little too far. Like there was one moment on the ship and Ruth Miner is actually on a ship at a couple points, and we're getting details about like the types of joints and the way they're held together for like parts of the interior of the ship. And it's like, I need to know if she's going to live through this situation, right? So maybe a teeny bit too much detail on a couple points through the book, but overall, that's a silly complaint to have about historical fiction. You want it to be richly detailed so that you're really there with the characters. So another one full of drama that I really enjoyed and would heartily recommend as well. So those are two historical fiction books that I read recently. What have you been reading? Are you a historical fiction reader? Drop your recommendations down in the comments below. Thanks. Bye.